Who are the ad watchers? We are attorneys at the National Advertising Division of BBB National Programs, a team with 50 years of experience investigating and resolving disputes over the truthfulness and accuracy of national advertising campaigns. I'm Toya Sutton.
And I'm Eric Unis. To make sure advertisers can back up what they are telling consumers, we don't just take ads at face value, we put them to the test. Why?
Because advertising law is simple. It's the execution that's hard. Welcome, everybody, to another episode and another season of Ad Watchers, NAD's podcast that gives a view into how our organization reviews claims and applies advertising law. If you missed any of our previous episodes in season 1, don't forget to check them out later. They're available wherever you're listening to this. Now, as you may have heard, I have a new co-host this season, and I'm excited to get into some ad law with my colleague, Eric Unis.
Thank you, Latoya. I'm very excited to be here for season 2. Season 1 was terrific, and hope to live up to that for season 2.
Definitely. I think this is going to be great. We have a whole new season of advertising issues to talk about. I'll let you do the honors. What are we talking about on our first episode of our second season?
Today, we're going green. We're going to talk about all things environmental and talk about environmental benefit claims like sustainability claims and related issues, and get advertisers and practitioners thinking about which questions they should be asking when they get into this area.
Yeah, I think that this is a great topic, and it's really timely because really green claims are everywhere. They seem to be just taking over the advertising landscape. Everybody wants to make these types of claims. And so, they're really a timely topic. Let's, kind of just start digging in with the basics. The sort of claims that we're talking about today, green advertising, environmental claims, they are covered by the FTC's green guides. Now, the formal name for those are the FTC's guides for the use of environmental marketing claims, but everybody calls them the green guides, and they set forth the FTC's current views about environmental claims. They're a really important document for the industry. They are really one of the most comprehensive guidance documents out there from any government agency, and they go into a lot of great depth and detail about how to approach and substantiate environmental claims.
So let's take a little trip back in time, and can you talk to us about what prompted the green guides? Where did they come from?
Yeah, totally. They didn't come out of nowhere. They weren't just, the brainchild of some industrious lawyer at the FTC. They came out of a very real world example. There was a claim made around 1989 by the Hefty Company about their so-called degradable trash bags. It was made on the front of the package of the product, and it did have a fairly big asterisk next to the word degradable. And so Hefty claimed in the sort of the footnote associated with the asterisk that the bags would degrade when activated by exposure to the elements, which was on the lower left-hand corner of the package. But what the company didn't tell you was that 90% of the bags would actually wind up in landfills where there are no elements. So there's no possibility of degradation. The company was sued by 7 states, and the product had to be pulled off the market. And so, it wasn't just this one incident, but it was incidents like this that prompted the FTC to put out these guides and to give some guidance to the industry about how to use these types of claims. The FTC published their first version of their green guides in 1992, and they've been updated 3 times since then, in 1996, 1998, and 2012, as new terms have entered the market and the FTC's, learning and understanding about green claims advance. So, the first few updates were kind of close together. And so now it's been, 10 years since the last update. So, not sure what's going to happen, but, maybe we will see another update soon.
We don't have a tremendous amount of specific guidance from the states. So as Latoya mentioned, this is the most comprehensive guidance we have.
So we've just talked about, how great these green guides are. That must mean that if you're a marketer making a claim that just falls squarely into one of these categories that are addressed in the green guides, you have it easy, right, Eric?
Not quite, Latoya. Even with the green guides, we still see a good amount of what's called greenwashing out there in the marketplace. A lot of vague terminology that's used where consumers can purchase a product with an environmental benefit claim attached and not really have a correct or a solid understanding of exactly what the advertiser is claiming. And I'll say that at NAD, we've seen both an evolution and an expansion of the types of environmental benefit claims that are out there, from the more traditional made from recycled materials claim that you're used to seeing, which you still see a lot of. Um, but you're also seeing new kinds of more broad kinds of claims, but everybody's getting in on it. There's an abundance of claims on the market, and they're attractive to consumers. Consumers want to feel like they're a part of making the world a better place, and what better way than to switch to a different brand of toilet paper?
Absolutely. So, marketers are really facing a pretty big conundrum of, how to deal with these types of claims. How do you avoid the trap of greenwashing, of saying something so vague that, it is by its own nature misleading, but you really do think that you have something positive to offer consumers and some positive benefit that will be good for the environment and kind of propagate these good vibes out there. So today we're going to highlight 4 major questions that companies should ask themselves when developing advertising that incorporates environmental claims to kind of, help supplement the guidance that you might find in the green guides and to fill in some of the gray areas that are out there, not to use too many colorful terms in the same sentence. But yeah, let's get into it.
Okay, so Latoya, what's the first question advertisers should ask themselves?
I think the first question is always going to be, is this advertising? You want these good vibes, which can come from, your company just doing good deeds or being associated with certain causes. But there is a point where, when does what you're doing cross into advertising? When you are putting positive statements out there into the universe. Environmental claims appear in all of the usual advertising that you might think of: TV commercial, magazine ads, product packaging, etc. But now there's new forms of media, new forms of communicating with consumers. So there are all these new kind of public facing materials where you might find green claims and environmental advertising.
One recent case we had at NAD actually involved a company's communication through their corporate and social responsibility report. So, a communication out to the public that was not traditional consumer advertising, but nonetheless, NAD took the view that claims made in that CSR report were advertising. The company was speaking to the public about the value of its product or brand. And when you do that, you have to be careful that you may be making an advertising claim that may require substantiation. And here, the particular claim was a very a bold claim in NAD's view about optimal sustainability practices, and NAD said that had to be substantiated.
Right. Companies want to talk to their consumers. They want to reach their consumers and do it in new ways, aside from just running a commercial on TV. And so the more places there are to advertise in the way that companies advertise, as that evolves, you still have to go back to that initial question of, is this advertising? And then am I fulfilling all the requirements for supporting claims that I make, because this is advertising? We had a recent case where it was a small company, kind of a startup type company. And because they were such a small company, they had a huge social media presence. That's really where they were kind of promoting their product. And The founders of the company were still, heavily involved in the marketing of the company, and they like to do, Instagram lives where they talk to people, talk to consumers directly about their product and about, the environmental benefits that they thought their product offered. And this was a cleaning company. And so there was a point where, you're promoting your product, you are selling the product. You are saying, go to our website, check us out, buy this, but you're also kind of talking on a grander scale about the fact that the product uses glass containers and that's better for the environment. And then you start making claims about, oh, we use these types of chemicals, our competitors use those types of chemicals, and ours are better or safer for the environment or have, some sort of benefit. It really starts to blur the line between, just kind of promoting your company and then making representations about your product that require actual objective support. And so, you just have to constantly think about that, as you're developing your advertising and as you're promoting your product.
And I think we'll see more of these questions as technology evolves. One recent case we had at NAD showing how companies are reaching the public and their customers, and when they may be advertising to them, the company's app tells you when you make a purchase what environmental impact you are having with that purchase. That's a communication about your product to the public that seeks to promote your product and can be construed as advertising.
I mean, it's just as a person, it's really interesting to see all this evolution and new technology, but it is just something that's going to continue to um, have an impact and be something to be kept in mind when you're developing your marketing and your support. Eric, is there any difference if the claim is about something aspirational? Because we see that a lot of companies want to be forward looking, want to be thinking about the future and future generations, especially when it comes to things like climate change and environmental impact. What does that sort of aspirational nature do to thinking about claim support?
I think it's important to keep in mind that an aspirational claim is not the same as puffery. An aspirational claim will require substantiation. It may be a little vague. It may be unrealized. But talking about what you want to do in the future or in the process of doing communicates to consumers that you are doing something, and you have to prove that that's what you're doing. So it's unlikely that claims that communicate an environmental benefit or promote the image of a company are going to be considered puffery, even if they do convey a message about the future. You have to have support for that claim, even if it is just an aspiration. For example, a company that we had a recent case that involved Chipotle, and they had a commercial where they talked about how they're making their farmers less carbon emitting and more organic. And it's aspirational. But they also demonstrated that they were putting action to their words. They were engaging in practices that promoted organic ingredients in their supply chain, promoting farming practices that limited carbon emissions. So in that case, the aspirational claim was supported.
Yeah, we had another recent case that we found really good support for an aspirational claim that was made by a clothing company that basically said that in 2018, we set out to remove virgin plastic from our entire supply chain by 2021. And that caught the attention of NAD just because, that's like it's a huge claim to say, especially for a clothing company, we're going to remove, all new plastics from our entire supply chain. And that that particular claim, the advertiser was able to demonstrate from start to finish that they were tracking and verifying the content of their materials that they were using in their product. They pointed to independent standards that they were certifying to, including the Global Recycled Standard. And in each stage of their production, from, again, the beginning sourcing of materials to the last seller, they made sure they were certified by this independent third party to ensure full compliance. And so at the time that we brought the inquiry, it was not 2021, or they had not quite reached their goal, but it was clear that they had set objectives and they were meeting their markers and they were taking action to meet this claim. It wasn't just, kind of something where a consumer, might see it and not know whether they actually did this or they were actually taking actions to meet this goal. They were actually doing what they said they were going to do.
So, as usual, it comes down to what message is conveyed to the audience and what message is conveyed to the aspiration. Now, sometimes we see these claims posed in the form of a question, or you'll see imagery that's futuristic or uses children in the advertising. So which doesn't mean that you don't have to substantiate the claim. It may just mean that the time horizon for the realization of the goal may be a little bit longer. But you still have to put action behind those words. And not all aspirations are created equally. Some may be very modest about what your practices are, what you hope to achieve through your environmental practices.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, what's the next big consideration for marketers?
Are you using the word sustainable correctly? This may seem like a very specific question to ask, but sustainability is everywhere. And it's definitely one of those good vibes buzzwords that gets attached to everything. There's not a great definition out there, but it is reflected in the FTC's statement of basis of purpose. I'll quote here what the FTC said, and it's consistent with the Green Guide's guidance on general environmental benefit claims. Marketers are still responsible for substantiating consumers' reasonable understanding of these claims. For example, if in context reasonable consumers perceive a sustainable claim as a general environmental benefit claim, the marketer must be able to substantiate the claim and all attendant reasonably implied claims. Given the potential for confusion, this area is ripe for further consumer perception research and one that the Commission will continue to monitor. In the meantime, marketers who use sustainable claims should test those claims in the context of their advertisements to ensure they can substantiate them. So there you have the FTC recognizing that sustainable can convey a lot of different meanings, and as we'll talk about, has to be contextualized accurately to not be misleading.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting that was back in 2012, and we still don't have a single legal definition. And we, the FTC pretty much then was saying that, this is an important word. We are paying attention and we're keeping our eye on it. But, here we are 10 years later, and we still don't have a generally accepted definition for what sustainability means. And like you said, it just means that the term might convey different messages depending on the context. It's very context specific. It's not a one size fits all approach with this term. And so You really have to look at the way it's been used, how others in the industry are using it, how consumers understand it. And, thankfully for our listeners, NAD, we have some cases with some practical applications to help decide when it might be appropriate to use the term in a marketing context. Eric, can you think of an example of a case where a company used sustainable and it was supported appropriately?
Yes, recently NAD had a case involving safe catch tuna. It's almost right there in the name, talking about their process for catching fish. One of the claims specifically at issue there was 100% sustainably caught wild tuna. And what NAD said there was that the claim was qualified and limited to one specific aspect of the product, and that was how the tuna is caught. And that claim of sustainably caught tuna was substantiated because the advertiser submitted that their methods conformed with the standards set by several different third-party organizations that were expert in this area. And their methods were sustainable because those standards looked at the effect on the species of fish. So you weren't overfishing that species. And also the overall impact on the ecosystem in which that fish was living. So in that context, the fishing methods were sustainable, and the advertiser could say that they were 100% sustainably caught wild tuna. So that's an example of where a sustainability claim was substantiated. I'll also note there the importance of third-party standards. They come up in a lot of different ways in substantiating claims, but they are especially important in environmental benefit claims because third parties often have the expertise to help advertisers substantiate those claims. That case, the claim was limited to a specific aspect of the process, but we have other examples where a broader or a vaguer use of sustainable or sustainably conveyed a message that the advertiser couldn't support. So if you say a product is sustainably created, that may convey a message about the entire manufacturing, transportation process which the product comes to market more than what you intend as the sustainable portion of that piece. If you're talking about manufacturing and you're using sustainable to mean that you're using renewable energy in manufacturing, you should limit the claim to the manufacturing process.
Yes, what I'm hearing, I think, is that what's of the utmost importance is properly limiting your sustainability claim, making sure that the claim is as narrow as the behaviors or the processes that you have to back up the claim. I think that also makes sense with a line of cases that we have where we noted that superlative claims about sustainability are very, very likely to be found to be unsubstantiated. We had a few cases, including one case that was about baby food, where the use of superlatives kind of got the advertiser, in front of their skis in terms of not having the support to back up their very strong claim. So in the baby food case, the claim that was being made were that the glass jars being used to hold the baby food were the ultimate in sustainability. And that's, sending a really strong consumer takeaway that this product, these glass jars, provide the greatest level of sustainability as compared to the packagings that's being used by competitors, and that glass baby food jars provide far-reaching environmental benefits, and they're superior to other types of packaging, such as plastic bottles. It was just like a really big claim. And while the advertiser did, have some support, they weren't making a baseless claim, but they had a life cycle analysis that was not specific to the products at issue. It was about, kind of glass containers and plastic bottles in general. And the analysis only addressed one aspect of sustainability, the product's respective carbon footprints. And so, their claim just was much broader than the support that they had behind it. And they just needed to make a more narrow claim. Again, another claim that we recently addressed was a food company that said that they were making good food in the most responsible and sustainable way. Again, that's a big superlative. And it communicates a tangible, objective message that consumers are going to understand that this company's practices have been optimized in relation to their impact on the environment. They've done something to make their food the most responsible, and they're making it in the most sustainable way. And the advertiser just did not have the evidence to support that. I think they thought that this was one of those good vibe claims that they could kind of make without support, and that just wasn't it.
So that takes us to our next question. And this is a question that isn't specific to green claims, but all claims. And that's, does the evidence fit the claim? Is it a good fit? I think it's important here in this area to think about that question even more. It's a point of concern because when we talk about environmental benefit claims, they aren't performance claims. There's a lot of room for misapplication or over exaggeration or misunderstanding on the part of the consumer. So your claim and your evidence should be as close as possible. We'll say this often: be precise. The vaguer you are, the more likely you are to fall into greenwashing or making a claim that isn't supported by the evidence.
Right. And, we have tons of cases on this, both, in general advertising, but also in the environmental advertising area. NAD recently concluded a monitoring case where we asked the advertiser for support for the claim that they have 3 trees planted for every tree used. And the advertiser had very specific support for this claim. They had, contractual relationships delineating how many trees were being used in their manufacturing process, agreements showing the number of replacement trees that were being planted, evidence that they were auditing to make sure that the trees were in fact being planted every year in areas that would thrive and actually make a difference in the environment. And so their support really matched the claim that they were making in a very quantitative way. In the past, we've had other cases. We had another previous monitoring case where the product being sold were tablets made from algae. And the claim that was at issue was the claim that the product throws off more oxygen into the air as they grow than the entire Amazon rainforest. I mean, it's truly a wild claim. It was just incredibly broad, and the advertiser didn't have any real evidence to support it. They kind of had articles about, algae being good for the environment, and if everyone started eating algae instead of eating meat, then, basically everything would be great with the ozone layer and, all of that. And that's great. It's good to know that information, but what was being conveyed to the consumer was that this product, was going to help save the Amazon, not just kind of in general, plants are good. And, you have to be able to show some hard evidence if you're going to make a claim like that and not just have kind of a theory that, plant based products provide a benefit.
Another point to remember that shouldn't get lost just because we're talking about environmental benefit claims, but comparative claims. If you are making a claim that our category of product is responsible for fewer carbon emissions than the competitor's category of product, that evidence is going to be carefully scrutinized, just as it would in any other case where scientific evidence is at issue. So the substantiation has to be a good fit, and the data must be reliable. The data must also need to be up to date because practices change, technology changes, and standards change. We had looked at some evidence, and one of our about a claim of comparative carbon emissions in an industry, and one of NAD's concerns was that the data was out of date and reflected a time when less manufacturing was done thanks to renewable energy, and reflected a time when more was done because of coal energy.
Right. You just can't rely on, kind of the stereotypes about, your competitors or, about a certain technology or something that's out in the marketplace. You really have to do your research and have your objective support just like any other type of advertising claim.
So that leads us to our final question. How are you evaluating consumer takeaway? One of NAD's primary concerns is making sure that consumers have complete information so that they can get the correct takeaway. And that's important here because consumers can't evaluate green claims for themselves. They're not experts in the field. It's a promise that a advertiser makes about the origin of the product very often, and there's no way for a consumer to verify that on their own. And if a company is doing one thing in the area of in the environment, there's no way for the consumer to check to make sure that the company is doing the thing they say they're doing. And also, it lends itself to a lot of jargon. Consumers may not be familiar with the terms being used. So consumers need a good understanding of what the terms being used mean in order to avoid a misleading takeaway. And as with all types of advertising, one thing NAD looks at is the visual representations made in the advertising.
Right. Because this is an area, where there are a lot of third party certifications, there are a lot of visual elements that they convey a message when you include a certification or a seal in your advertising. They tell the consumer something, and that could be the key element on whether your advertising is misleading or not. In a recent case, one of the determining factors in what message was being conveyed to consumers in the actual advertising claims were their proximity to a seal that kind of informed the context. Basically, a claim that's an environmental claim or a claim about a green product benefit could be interpreted broadly based on the sort of face value of the words. But if it's put in close proximity to a seal that then informs that claim and then qualifies it, it will give additional context to the claim, and that will affect consumer takeaway. So it's really important, if you are making a claim that is associated with something that has been certified or is the basis for a seal, you can't have the seal over on one side of the ad and the claim all the way on the other side necessarily. They have to be in they have to be read together in order to give the correct consumer takeaway.
So another way to make sure consumers are getting an accurate picture of the nature of the claim, and not taking away a message that is bigger than you intended. You often see messages that speak to the individual impact and what that consumer's specific choice, what impact that may have on the environment. And marketers need to be careful not to over exaggerate that impact. So, for example, if you're giving consumers a breakdown of what their purchase represents and how much water was saved because they bought food at your restaurant as opposed to someone else, it needs to be clear that the information you've given them is, if it's an average, it needs to state that it's an average. If it's a guess that's as to the specific product that they purchased, then it should say that. And breaking it down at that level is tricky, but most importantly, it needs to accurately convey what the individual's impact is. So, for example, if you have a claim about how many trees have been saved or will be saved by purchasing a particular paper product, it has to be clear to the consumer what their individual purchase means in the scheme of things. How many consumers need to buy this product for a certain number of trees to be saved? That needs to be accurately conveyed to the consumer.
And I think the last thing that we should touch on, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier, is the use of jargon, the use of, terms that consumers might not be 100% familiar with, or they might be sort of undefined where there's no, clear consensus. And that also kind of ties into what we were talking about with sustainability. But there's much more out there that is unclear and undefined and not agreed upon, throughout the industry. And if a consumer doesn't know what a term means, whether it's upcycled or half cycled, or just any new kind of green term that a company might come up with, it still falls on the advertiser to make sure they understand the claim and they aren't taking away an overly broad or just a misleading message from their advertising. It's, again, comes back to the premise that advertisers are responsible for all reasonably conveyed messages, not just the ones that you intended to make. So, that's the hard part about using new terms or undefined terms, particularly when it comes to green advertising. You really have to stop and think, is this so niche, that's only been used in a small part of the industry, and now we're going to do a national advertising campaign, and are people going to get it? Or are they going to understand what this means and the impact and all of the associated benefits? That has to be built into your thought process for how you're going to communicate your advertising.
So, Latoya, we're getting close to the end. We've covered a lot of ground and hopefully given our listeners some things to think about when developing environmental claims. Let's sum things up with some key takeaways. Latoya, what do you think are the key takeaways from our discussion today?
Sure. I think there are a few. Again, I cannot stress how important the is it advertising question is, because not everything, but just a whole lot of what is presented to the public by a company where you're saying something positive and you're trying to draw people in and have them come and try your product or try your service, that could be advertising. And if you haven't recognized that, then you have already kind of missed a step in making sure that you're not being misleading to consumers. I think another key point is, that just by making something aspirational in nature doesn't mean that you don't have to support that notion. Aspirational claims need substantiation too. And, you can't just kind of go out there and say, this is what our company dreams to do. You have to show a genuine and demonstrable commitment to achieving that aspiration. And then also, when in doubt, make a narrow claim and be specific. That is the best way to avoid greenwashing, is to really tailor your claim and be as specific as you can in order to match your support. So I think that's what I hope our listeners will take away. Eric, do you have anything to add?
I would tell our listeners to stay tuned for more guidance, because this is definitely an evolving area, and we're learning something new every day about this, the claims of this nature.
Right. Yeah, that's why we love this job so much. Thank you again for tuning in to this episode of the Ad Watchers. We hope you enjoyed our deep dive into green advertising claims.
Join us next month when we'll be discussing survey evidence. As always, you can head over to our website, bbbprograms.org, to learn more about what we do at the National Advertising Division or any of our other self-regulatory programs. That's all for this episode. See you next time.
Bye, Eric.
Bye, LaToya.